I'm about to tell you about a man who thought he owned everything in that house until the day he discovered he never truly owned any of it. Before I get into it, tell me in the comments, what's the worst thing a parent can take from their child? Trust? A sense of belonging? This story stayed with me for a long time. The house on Willowbrook Lane had been quiet for 3 years. Not peaceful quiet, just the kind that settles between two people who have stopped understanding each other but still live under the same roof. I sat at the kitchen table with my hands resting on the worn wooden surface when my father, Garrett, slammed a manila folder down in front of me. "You're signing this today," he said. I looked at the papers but didn't touch them. "Your mother's estate has been tied up long enough," he continued. "Sign your share over to me so I can sell this place and move on with my life." For a moment I just stared at him. 3 years ago when my mother died, I thought grief had changed him. Over time I realized it had revealed parts of him I never wanted to see. "No," I said quietly. The room seemed to freeze. His jaw tightened. "What did you just say?" I said no. His eyes narrowed. "This isn't a negotiation. You're 24 years old. You don't need this house." "I do." I shook my head. "I'm not signing anything." The anger he'd been holding back finally erupted. He pushed his chair away and stood so fast it scraped across the floor. "Then get out of my house," he yelled. "Get out tonight. If you won't sign, you don't live here anymore. I didn't raise you to be this selfish." I expected to feel devastated when those words finally came. Instead, I felt strangely calm. I'd been preparing for this moment longer than he knew. Without saying another word, I stood up and walked upstairs. 3 minutes later, I came back down carrying a single suitcase. My father stared at it. "You were already packed?" I looked at him for a long moment. I was ready. Then I walked out the front door without looking back, leaving him alone in the house he believed was entirely his. I didn't drive far after leaving the house. 3 blocks away, I pulled into the parking lot of a small apartment complex and parked in the same spot I'd been using for more than a year. The engine ticked softly as it cooled, but I just sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, staring through the windshield. My father probably thought I had nowhere to go. He probably imagined I would spend the night at a friend's house, cry for a few hours, then come back and apologize. He had always underestimated how much planning I had done, how long I had been preparing for the day everything finally fell apart. The truth was that I'd been renting this apartment for 18 months. I paid for it with money from my job at the veterinary clinic. Every paycheck, every deposit, every bill had been carefully managed without him knowing. Not because I wanted to hide from him, but because I knew I might eventually need a place where his anger couldn't reach me. I grabbed my suitcase and climbed the stairs to the second floor. The apartment wasn't fancy. It had a worn couch, a small dining table, and a kitchen that rarely saw more than coffee and microwave meals. But it was mine. As soon as I stepped inside, the silence felt different from the silence at Willowbrook Lane. This wasn't the silence of tension. It was the silence of freedom. I set my suitcase beside the couch and walked toward the refrigerator. A photograph was held there by a small cardinal-shaped magnet. It showed my mother standing in front of our house years earlier, smiling with one arm wrapped around my shoulders. For a moment I just stared at her face. The ache I'd been holding back all evening finally settled into my chest. "I'm sorry, Mom," I whispered. Not because I had left. Not because I had refused to sign. I was sorry because I had spent 3 years trying to hold together something that had already broken. I hadn't stayed in that house because I needed my father. I had stayed because I believed he needed me. And now, sitting alone in my apartment, I realized something painful. The person I'd been protecting all those years had never understood the sacrifice I was making. My father didn't sleep that night. At least that's what I learned later. After I left, he stayed alone in the house on Willowbrook Lane, convinced that I would come back before morning. He had spent years believing that every disagreement ended the same way, with him getting what he wanted. In his mind, this would be no different. He sat in the living room with a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring at the front door. Every sound outside caught his attention. A passing car. Footsteps on the sidewalk. The wind moving through the trees. Each time he thought it might be me returning. But I never did. As the hours dragged by, he kept repeating the same story to himself. I was being dramatic. I was trying to punish him. I would eventually realize I had nowhere else to go. The more he repeated those thoughts, the more he believed them. Around 2 in the morning, he finally got up from the couch and walked upstairs. Maybe he wanted proof that I would return. Maybe he wanted reassurance that he had done the right thing. When he opened my bedroom door, he stopped. The room was almost empty. The closet doors stood open. Most of my clothes were gone. The shelves that once held books and photographs looked strangely bare. For the first time that night, uncertainty crept into his mind. He stepped farther inside and looked around slowly. The room didn't look like it belonged to someone who planned to come back tomorrow. It looked like it belonged to someone who had already said goodbye. He stood there for several minutes, saying nothing. A small part of him understood what that meant. Not guilt. Not yet. Just the first crack in the certainty he'd carried for years. Instead of examining that feeling, he pushed it away. "This is her fault," he muttered to himself. The words sounded weaker in the empty room than they had in his head. He closed the closet door and looked around one last time. "She's doing this to punish me." With that, he turned off the light and walked downstairs. The house felt larger than usual. Quieter. He poured himself another drink and sat back down in the living room. The front door never opened. And for the first time he began to wonder if I was gone for good. 3 years earlier, my mother had gone to bed on an ordinary Tuesday night and never woke up. One moment she was planning a weekend trip and reminding me to buy groceries. The next she was gone. The doctors called it a massive stroke. I called it the day everything changed. The funeral brought relatives, neighbors, and old friends from every stage of her life. People filled the church with stories about her kindness, her patience, and the way she could make anyone feel welcome. For a few hours, it felt like the world had stopped to honor the woman who held our family together. Then everyone went home. That's when the real loss began. My father wasn't the same after that. At first, I told myself grief was responsible. He stopped laughing. He stopped spending time with friends. He stopped visiting Mom's favorite places. Weeks turned into months, and the warmth that once existed in our home slowly disappeared. Then something else changed. He started talking about the house. At first it sounded harmless. "We should simplify things. We need to get the paperwork organized. Your mother wouldn't want us dealing with legal complications." But eventually those conversations became pressure. Again and again he placed documents in front of me and asked me to sign them. Whenever I asked questions, he brushed them aside. "It doesn't matter. I'm handling everything. You can trust me." The more he pushed, the more uneasy I became. 2 months after Mom's funeral, I was sorting through her desk when I discovered a folder hidden beneath several old notebooks. Inside was a copy of the original property deed. I almost didn't look at it. But when I did, one detail caught my attention immediately. The house wasn't listed solely under my father's name. My mother's name was there. I stared at the document for a long time. When I later asked my father about it, he dismissed my concerns. "It's just a technical issue," he said. "Nothing you need to worry about." Something about his answer didn't feel right. A few days later, without telling him, I scheduled a consultation with a real estate attorney. After reviewing the documents, the attorney looked directly at me. "Your mother owned a legal interest in this property," he explained. "After her passing, part of that interest became part of her estate." I listened carefully as he explained what that meant. By the time I left his office, I knew something my father didn't know. And I decided to keep that knowledge to myself. The morning after he threw me out, my father woke up alone in the living room. The television was still on, casting a pale glow across the room. An empty whiskey glass sat on the coffee table beside him. For a moment he looked around in confusion, trying to remember how he had ended up sleeping on the couch. Then the memory returned. The argument. The papers. My refusal. And finally, the words he could never take back. "Get out of my house." He rubbed his face and sat upright. The house felt unusually still. No footsteps upstairs. No sound coming from the kitchen. No sign that anyone else lived there. For years, my presence had become part of the background of his life. He rarely acknowledged it, but it was always there. Now it wasn't. He walked into the kitchen and immediately noticed my coffee mug sitting in the sink. It was a small thing, but he found himself staring at it longer than expected. The empty chair at the table caught his attention next. Just 24 hours earlier I had been sitting there. Now there was only silence. "She'll come back," he muttered. The words sounded more like a hope than a certainty. He made coffee and sat at the table. Every few minutes he glanced at his phone, expecting a message or a missed call. Nothing appeared. An hour passed. Then another. Still nothing. Part of him considered calling me, but his pride stopped him. Reaching out would mean admitting he had gone too far. It would mean admitting that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the injured party in all of this. Instead, he focused on something else. The house. If he could prove the property belonged entirely to him, then everything else would make sense. I would realize I was wrong. I would apologize. The situation would fix itself. At least that's what he told himself. Determined to find evidence, he headed toward the spare room that had slowly become a storage space over the years. Dust-covered boxes lined the walls. Filing cabinets stood forgotten in the corners. He spent the next hour digging through old records, tax documents, insurance statements, and faded folders. Finally, buried beneath a stack of paperwork, he found a file labeled in black marker. House, original. His heartbeat quickened. Certain that the folder would prove he had been right all along, he carried it to the desk and opened it. What he found inside was the beginning of everything he thought he understood falling apart. My father opened the folder expecting confirmation. In his mind, the documents inside would finally prove what he had believed for years. That the house belonged to him and that I had been standing in the way of something that was rightfully his. Instead, the first page made his stomach drop. It was a copy of the original property deed. He adjusted his glasses and read it once. Then he read it again. And then a third time. The words remained exactly the same. My mother's name appeared at the top of the document. Not his. Carol N. Presley was listed as the primary owner when the property was purchased decades earlier. My father's name appeared as a joint tenant, but the document was far more complicated than he had convinced himself it was. He sat down heavily in the chair. "This can't be right," he whispered. For several minutes he searched through the rest of the folder, hoping to find another document that would somehow erase what he had just seen. Nothing did. Every page pointed to the same reality. The house had never belonged solely to him. His hands trembled as he reached for his phone and called the attorney who had handled much of the paperwork after my mother's death. The lawyer answered after a few rings. "Garrett, what can I do for you?" My father wasted no time. "I'm looking at the deed right now," he said. "There has to be some mistake." There was a brief silence. What mistake? The house. Carol's ownership. Elena's claim. None of this makes sense. The lawyer sighed. "Garrett, we've discussed this before." "No, we haven't." "Yes, we have. 18 months ago." My father gripped the phone tighter. The lawyer continued carefully. "When Carol passed away, her interest in the property became part of her estate. Elena inherited legal rights connected to that estate. She has every right to refuse a sale." The room seemed to spin around him. "You never explained it like that." "I did," the lawyer replied. "You just didn't want to hear it." The words hit harder than any argument ever could. After the call ended, my father remained seated on the floor beside the filing cabinet. For years he had treated me like an obstacle standing between him and what he wanted. Now he was facing a truth he could no longer ignore. I hadn't been preventing him from selling the house. I had possessed the power to stop him all along. And he had thrown me out without ever realizing it. For the first time since I left, fear began replacing certainty. The rest of that day became a desperate search for answers. After speaking with the first attorney, my father contacted 3 more lawyers, convinced that someone would tell him what he wanted to hear. He explained the situation repeatedly, each time hoping for a different outcome. The answers never changed. Every attorney confirmed the same thing. I legally owned an interest in the house. I always had. Without my cooperation, no sale could move forward. By late afternoon, the confidence that had carried him through the past 3 years was gone. The certainty that he had been in control of everything had disappeared, replaced by a growing sense of panic. For the first time he called me. When I saw his name appear on my phone, I simply stared at the screen. I didn't answer. A few minutes later he called again. Then again. And again. Each call went to voicemail. Soon messages began arriving. "Elena, call me. We need to talk. Please answer." The requests became more urgent with every attempt. But after everything that had happened, I wasn't ready to hear his voice. Back at the house, my father continued searching for something that would make sense of the situation. He wandered upstairs and eventually found himself standing in my bedroom doorway. The room felt emptier than before. This time, however, he wasn't looking for proof that he was right. He was looking for proof that he wasn't completely wrong. He opened drawers and searched shelves until he noticed a folder pushed into the back corner of my closet behind an old storage box. Curious, he pulled it out. Inside were copies of legal documents, probate records, property information, highlighted sections from the original deed. His heartbeat quickened as he turned page after page. Then he found handwritten notes. My notes. One entry, written only a few months after Mom's death, immediately caught his attention. He sat on the edge of the bed and began reading. The words explained that I had discovered the truth about the house years earlier. I knew exactly what my rights were. I knew I could challenge him if I wanted to. But I hadn't. Not because I was afraid. Because he was still my father. Page after page revealed the same thing. I had stayed in that house to protect him. I had tolerated the pressure, the manipulation, and the endless demands because I believed Mom would have wanted me to show him compassion. As the realization settled in, my father lowered the papers and buried his face in his hands. For the first time, he understood that the person he had treated as an enemy had been protecting him all along. The next morning, I went to work as if nothing had happened. The animals didn't know my life had changed. The dogs still barked impatiently from their kennels. The cats still watched everyone with suspicious eyes. Appointments filled the schedule, phones rang constantly, and co-workers discussed ordinary things like weekend plans and grocery shopping. Part of me was grateful for that. Normal life kept me moving when my thoughts wanted to pull me backward. I checked in patients, cleaned examination rooms, and focused on every task I could find. As long as I stayed busy, I didn't have to think about my father sitting alone in that house. But the truth was impossible to avoid completely. Every quiet moment brought memories rushing back. I remembered family dinners before Mom died. I remembered summer evenings in the backyard. I remembered the father I used to admire before grief and bitterness transformed him into someone I barely recognized. Around 4 in the afternoon, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. The message came from an unfamiliar number. Elena, it's Dad. Please. I need to talk to you. For a long moment, I simply stared at the words. Less than 48 hours earlier, he had ordered me out of his house. Now he was asking me to call him. Part of me wanted to ignore the message completely. Another part wanted answers. Eventually, I typed a response. There's nothing to talk about. You made yourself clear. I pressed send and slipped the phone back into my pocket. A few minutes later, it vibrated again. This time the message was much shorter. I was wrong. I read those 3 words several times. They should have felt satisfying. For years, I had wanted him to acknowledge what he was doing. I had wanted him to see the pressure, the manipulation, and the hurt he kept causing. Now the admission had finally arrived. Yet instead of relief, I felt sadness. Because those words had come only after his control had disappeared. Only after he learned the truth. Only after he realized he needed something from me. I stood alone in the break room staring at the screen. Maybe he truly regretted what he had done. Maybe he finally understood. But understanding didn't erase 3 years of damage. It didn't restore trust. And it didn't change the fact that when he told me to leave, a part of me had realized I no longer had a home there. I locked my phone and slipped it away. Whatever happened next, I wasn't ready to answer him yet. 3 days after I left Willowbrook Lane, I made a decision that surprised even me. I sat alone at my apartment's small kitchen table with a stack of documents in front of me. Beside them rested a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. For hours I stared at the papers, reading every line carefully. Legally, I had options. I could force negotiations. I could demand compensation. I could keep my share of the property indefinitely. After everything that had happened, nobody would have blamed me. But the longer I thought about it, the more I realized the house had never been what I wanted. The house was only a symbol. What I had truly wanted all those years was a father who cared more about me than a piece of property. And no legal document could give me that. By late afternoon, my decision was made. I met with an attorney, signed the necessary paperwork, and had everything notarized. The transfer documents gave my father complete ownership of the house. No conditions. No demands. No fight. When the process was complete, I placed the papers into a large envelope. Then I added one final item. A handwritten note. It took me several minutes to write a single sentence. When I finished, I sealed the envelope and arranged for a courier to deliver it. The next morning, my father answered a knock at the front door. He signed for the package without knowing what it contained. Only after returning to the kitchen table did he open it. The moment he saw the documents, he froze. Page after page confirmed the same thing. I was giving him my share of the property. Completely. Permanently. He turned to the final page and found the note attached near the bottom. His eyes stopped on the handwritten sentence. I didn't want the house. I wanted a father. The words hit harder than any lawsuit ever could. He read them once. Then again. And again. The kitchen grew silent. 3 years of arguments suddenly looked different. 3 years of pressure suddenly felt cruel. For years he had believed we were fighting over a house. But sitting there alone, staring at my handwriting, he finally understood the truth. I had never been trying to take something from him. I had been hoping he would choose our relationship over his pride. Instead, he had pushed me away until there was nothing left to hold on to. The documents gave him exactly what he wanted. Yet as he sat at that table, he had never felt more aware of everything he had lost. My father filed the transfer documents the very next morning. The process was simple. A few signatures. A few official stamps. A short visit to the county office. When it was finished, the house on Willowbrook Lane belonged entirely to him. It was everything he had spent years trying to achieve. Yet as he drove home, there was no sense of victory waiting for him. Only silence. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. The house remained exactly as it had been. He never sold it. He never renovated it. He never made the fresh start he had claimed to want so badly. Instead, he stayed. Alone. Every room seemed to carry a memory he could not escape. The kitchen reminded him of family dinners. The hallway reminded him of school pictures and birthday decorations. The backyard reminded him of summer afternoons when my mother worked in her garden while I chased fireflies across the lawn. The house had become a museum of regrets. I never called. He never expected me to. The distance between us was no longer measured in miles. It was measured in years of disappointment and words that could never be unsaid. One evening, nearly 2 years later, he found the folder from my closet again. He carried it into the living room and slowly read every page. The legal documents. The highlighted notes. The journal entries. All the evidence of a daughter who had stayed far longer than anyone would have expected. At the very back was the final page. A page he had read before but never truly understood. Mom died believing we were a family. I stayed because I wanted to believe it too. But some houses aren't homes. Some people aren't parents. And some doors once closed stay closed for a reason. I forgive you, Dad. Not because you earned it. But because I don't want to carry that pain forever. Take care of the house. It belonged to Mom, then to both of us, and now to you. Make it mean something. My father lowered the page and stared out the window. The garden where Mom once planted flowers was overgrown now. The swing I used as a child sat motionless beneath the old oak tree. For the first time he understood what had happened. I never wanted the property. I never wanted control. I never wanted revenge. I wanted a father. And while he spent years fighting to keep a house, he lost the daughter who had been trying to keep a family. The house was his now. Every wall. Every room. Every memory. But some losses cannot be reversed. And some doors once closed never open again. Before you go, share your thoughts in the comments. Was Elena right to walk away, or should she have stayed? Tell us what you felt and pass this story on to someone who needs a reminder about pride, family, and regret.